So next up, podcast listeners, we have this hilarious story about Matt Walsh. You may have seen this, part of this story at least, just part of it, where Matt Walsh talks about his new book. It's a children's book that he wrote. But what you haven't seen is the fact that Matt Walsh spoke at a university. And this just happened a couple days ago. Spoke at a university, and he was invited to speak to a group, I think maybe with the Republican group or the Young Americans for Freedom, one of these groups. And then, of course, there was this massive, very large protest outside because the individuals were very angry and triggered by Matt Walsh's book. So Matt Walsh, if you don't know already, is a podcaster. He's affiliated with the Daily Wire. And he is famous for really doing some funny things, kind of in your face funny things, especially. For example, in the Virginia gubernatorial race, when Loudoun County, Virginia, decided that you couldn't testify in Virginia in front of the Loudoun County School Board unless I think you had a child in the system or something like that. You had to have a child registered. And he did something to make himself qualify so he could then, forgotten what it was. Do you remember, Chris? He did something to make himself qualify so he could actually testify in front of the Loudoun School Board, which made it hilarious, which made it absolutely hilarious. And he's doing the same thing with his children's book. So first, we're going to set this up with the children's book itself. Matt Walsh's children's book sells out on Amazon in the matter of hours. By the way, it's now #1 on Amazon. And the book is called Johnny the Walrus. Johnny the Walrus, which is a children's book, penned by the Daily. You got that on that? What did he do again?
He rented a Loudoun County home to speak.
That's what it was. Yeah. So in Loudoun County, in order to speak in front of the school board, you had to have a home in Loudoun County. So what Matt Walsh did was, he's not a Virginia resident, certainly not a Loudoun County, Virginia resident either. He rented a home so that way, and the home was in Loudoun County, and it was a legitimate lease and a legitimate rental, and that enabled him and gave him standing, since Loudoun County School Board changed the regulations about who could testify in front of them. That enabled him to have standing so that he could testify in front of the school board and talk about the crazy stuff that they're teaching in the Loudoun County school system. And as you know, the election turned out quite well for Glenn Youngkin, in large part because of the national exposure of Loudoun County and the kind of crazy stuff that they were teaching in their schools. Among those things, of course, transgenderism and allowing transgenders to use whatever bathrooms they want, as if children have the ability to make that decision for themselves, which of course they don't. That's why we call them children. So again, Matt Walsh writes this Johnny the Walrus children's book. This is brand new. And it's penned by the Daily Wire host, Matt Walsh. And it's already sold out on Amazon mere hours after its publication. The book, which tackles the issue of radical transgender ideology foisted on children, hit the #1 spot on the Amazon Movers and Shakers list early Tuesday, and soon became the overall 4th best-selling book on the site. That's pretty extraordinary because it's a children's book. The success of the book proves, it's quote, the success of the book proves that people are tired of the children's book market being dominated by left-wing propaganda. Walsh, a fierce cultural warrior on the right, told the Daily Wire. Quote, also, it indicates perhaps that there is a mostly untapped interest in walruses. End quote. He snarked in the true Walsh fashion. Posting on Twitter Tuesday, Walsh added, quote, folks, we did it. My fanciful tale about a trans walrus is now in the top 5 on Amazon. I shall henceforth be known as best-selling children's author Matt Walsh. And then he has, of course, underneath that, what the book costs and where you can buy it. So the book, this is the funny part, the book features a young boy named Johnny with a wild imagination. The child envisions himself as many things, including a walrus. His progressive mommy knows that her boy is a boy, but becomes pressured by her friends on social media to treat and transition her child to live his true identity as a walrus. Which is, I'm sorry, it's really funny. Quote, but will Johnny be happy in his trans walrus identity? Walsh said, read and find out. So, the book will teach children that there is a difference between reality and make-believe. And parents will learn that a child's imaginative whims should not be turned into a full-blown identity crisis. The podcast host explained, there are dozens of children's books brainwashing kids into the gender identity cult where they are taught that identity is malleable and biology is meaningless, Walsh asserted. The book is meant to be an antidote to that madness. If you'd like to reserve your copies of the quick-selling book, you can go, of course, online at Amazon. That's kind of the end of the article. But here's the thing. It's not just that Walsh wrote this book to be satirical about progressive moms and or progressive dads who don't understand that they are actually the parents, and that when you have a child and your child is playing make-believe, or your child is engaging with a group of people that you don't necessarily want them to hang out with, and then your child's like, hey, I think that I'm going to wear a dress today and I should go into the woman's room. You know, you're a parent, you're the adult, and you can still underscore the idea that there are only two genders. And, well, that's kind of what happened next. And here is the part that is equally funny and tells you about the state of America's university system, higher ed system. So also, Matt Walsh, he greets scores of protesters outside St. Louis University, and he poses one simple question. So, and this is about his book. So Matt Walsh was invited to speak at the university. He goes to the university to speak and in part talks about his book. That's really one of the reasons he was invited, to discuss the new children's book and what it's about and why he wrote it. And here's the article. Daily Wire, and we have the clip too. You're going to love it. Daily Wire host Matt Walsh confronted scores of demonstrators protesting his lecture in St. Louis on Wednesday night. A crowd of anti-Walsh protesters demanded the Daily Wire host and best-selling children's book author cancel the event. A speech for students of St. Louis University said, the protesters blocked the street immediately outside the venue and chanted slogans such as, hey, hey, ho, ho, Matt Walsh has got to go, and Black Lives Matter. I mean, yeah, real creative, guys. Remember, Matt Walsh was there to speak about his children's book. At one point during the protest, Walsh walked out of the venue, accompanied by law enforcement, to speak with the protesters. And there, as I said, there are quite a few of protesters there. Because you can imagine how a children's book that Matt Walsh wrote, making fun of the progressive mom and a kid with an imagination to be a walrus, and his mother's trying to say, okay, we're going to transition you into a walrus, would really trigger the left, which is, of course, the point. The Daily Wire host was met with boos, chants, and one man screaming, do not come over here. The crowd took several steps back as Walsh approached. And so here's where this clip is ideal, because Matt Walsh was inside of a theater, talking to a large audience about his book. And since these individuals were outside and they were yelling so loud, he's like, you know what, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to talk to these people. And of course, as he tries to have a conversation with them, they step away. And he has security around him because the campus, of course, had to provide security because, God forbid, you can't be a conservative on campus and not have security these days because the left is so peaceful. He goes outside. Matt Walsh goes outside with the security and he starts talking to them. And it's extraordinary because he tweets out, and we're going to play this clip, but he tweets out, Walsh does, "I went outside to say hi to my protesters and give them a chance to answer one question. What is a woman?" And they declined to answer. In fact, they stepped back and they just like screamed more because that's what the left does. You know, they're so podcast listeners, they're so triggered. They're so triggered by this book. They're like, no, there are more than two genders. Well, anyway, we had that clip and here it is.
Woman. I can be here if I want to be here. Hey, can anyone tell me what a woman is? That was my challenge. Can you define the word woman? Any of you? It's not your body. It's the baby's body.
So he's talking about his book, and the theme of his book is that there are only two genders. And you heard the people in the background, my body, my choice. Yeah, it's your choice to become whatever you want to, but there are still two genders, and that's it. So, quote, in the article, quote, "My favorite part was when the guy shouted, 'Do not come over here.' And then I came over there and he backed away," Walsh added. Quote, "This is no way to treat a children's book author," Walsh said. The Young America's Foundation posted another video showing Walsh approaching the crowd of protesters while they backed away as well. Walsh's lecture sparked controversy long before the protest formed. In the days leading up to the event, Walsh's lecture was blocked from taking place first on campus, then inside a church, as the Daily Wire reported. So apparently, the St. Louis University wouldn't even allow that to happen. So it appears, although I'm not certain, that he may have ended up having it in a church and then he walked outside, or a church that was really adjacent to the campus. In any event, didn't matter. Protesters still showed up because they're so triggered, not just about the First Amendment. You know, they can't handle the First Amendment, but also they're triggered because of the simple fact that someone is actually teaching children of all people, that there are boys and that there are girls, and creating that baseline for children that is so very important for a happy life. And so good for you, Matt Walsh. Excellent job.